Hi, this is Leonard from Kosmic Sound, and we're here today to bring you something very exciting from Roland. It's a new synth in their boutique line for 2016, and it is the TB-03, a recreation of the TB-03. Personally, I'm really excited about this. This was the sound that first got me into electronic music way back nearly 20 years ago now. And since that time, I've dreamed of owning one. And let me tell you, once you get on this thing, you will have that sense of authenticity. It is pretty much the closest thing that you will find. Even though there are a lot of other emulations out there, having that nice big Roland logo on there makes all the difference. Let's briefly go through the technology that's involved. So this, like the other boutique products and the IRA products that came before it, uses Roland's analog circuit behavior modeling technology, or ACB for short. Without going too in depth into what that means, a lot of other analog emulations are made by modeling waveforms, and this can be done with varying success, but quite often you find you have problems like stepped filters and it doesn't quite sound analog. Roland's technology actually models the components that were in the original hardware, and what that provides is effectively a better recreation of the original hardware. That's the technology that's gone into this, and by all rights, it's a great success. What I wanted to do next is just talk about the history of the original products. It's actually a very interesting piece of hardware if you're not familiar with it already. It was made between 1982 and 1984 as a practice tool for guitarists primarily. If they didn't have a bass player around, they could program a bass line and play along with it. For a couple of reasons it was not very successful. Firstly, it sounded nothing like a bass guitar, and secondly, it was notoriously difficult to program. So it didn't do too well, was taken out of the market in 1984, and then 2 or 3 years later in the mid-80s, Acid House came along, which sort of gave it a resurgence of popularity, and since then it's been in very high demand, and as there are only a small number of them made, they're extremely expensive to buy second-hand, which largely took them out of the possibility for amateur musicians or those with project studios to own them. And that's why it's been so wonderful that Roland a couple of years ago brought us the TB-03, which gave us the classic sound of the TB-03 and a lot more in there. It's full of other synth patches, all kinds of sounds effects. It's pretty obvious to me why Roland has brought this one out, because when you stand in front of it, you get this total sense of authenticity and actually playing the real instrument. I'm going to quickly just show you some differences between the two units, because there are a couple of obvious ones. The major one is, of course, the knobs that we have on here. So if we look at the TB-03, what you see on here is pretty much exactly what you had on a TB-303. So you had your row of knobs at the top. All of those are present on this one. They're all exactly the same. The pattern group and the mode switches are exactly the same. The sequencer visually is exactly the same. If we look at the TB-3, so while you got the sound of the TB-303, the envelope mod and decay parameters had to be played on an XY. In many ways, it's a lot easier to use than an original TB-303. But that's why this unit is so special, because it can do more and it can do things differently than the original TB-303 did. So let me just run through a couple of things on here that are unique. First of all, it has built-in effects, and these are absolutely wonderful. It's exactly what you want on a machine that makes this sound. You've got overdrive and you've got a delay built into it. We've also got a trigger in on here. So on the TB-303, that was a 5-pin DIN cable that you could sync through. This is just a mini jack, so anything that has a mini jack out or that sends a pulse signal, you can run into that, and each pulse will trigger a different step. You can see on the back as well, we've got the standard MIDI in-out as well. We've also got a few audio connections, so like the TB-303, you've got your mix-in, output and phone, so you can run an external signal through it. We have a volume control, so the unit's USB powered, but you can also battery power it, and it has a built-in speaker if you're not connected to any other sound system or speaker setup at that particular time. The other great thing we've got on here is this CV and gate outputs here. So the CV sends volt per octave, which is pretty standard. We've also got the gate output, so you can use this really to sequence any analog hardware you have that can receive CV and gate. That's basically what we've got on here. Now I'm going to show you how it all works. Let's start out with patterns, just playing a simple pattern. So what you do here, you've got your switch here, and this basically just sets what mode we want to be in. So the two things we can do on here, we have a pattern mode, which will just play a single loop. And we also have track mode, where we can sequence a number of patterns to create a larger structure. I'm just going to jump into playing a pattern here. Playing back patterns is really easy. So once you're in play, you need to select a pattern group. So you can see there are actually 2 clicks for every one. So that's group 1, group 2 on 3 and 4, group 3 is on 5 and 6, and group 4 is on 7. And then once you've selected a group, your buttons along here just select which pattern you want, and of course you can have 8 of them within each group. So I'm just going to hit play on here, and then what we can do is just switch pattern like so. So it's really easy to use. And while we've got one going, let's just have a bit of a play with the knobs on here. So the first thing we can do, of course, is tune it. So that's an octave each way. You can go an octave up and an octave down the other way. And the rest of the knobs on here are pretty much for colouring. You have an accent knob on the end as well. You can hear it's a bit obvious when that comes out, and you actually do that through the sequencer as well, which I'll show you when we get to sequencing. Then we have a cutoff frequency. This is the famous TB-03 filter, which is really responsible for the sound in many ways. We have envelope mod. It sort of makes it a bit punchier as we move up, and our decay obviously gives us a longer decay time. And then, of course, the sound that everybody loves is when you crank up the resonance on this filter. And when you combine that with some envelope mod and decay, you can get all kinds of different sounds. One thing as well I really like about this, there's a lot of emulations out there. I personally started out using Rebirth in the 90s, and there's a lot of plugins as well, you know, Audio Realism, Bass Line, D16, Fossion. There's a lot of them out there. And this actually behaves a bit differently to all of those. I've noticed with it that you do actually get quite an increase in volume when you take the resonance down. And that's common with most synthesizers, but what you find with a lot of TB-03 emulations is they actually remove that, so that as you increase the resonance, the volume actually stays the same. So once again, you get a feeling of authenticity about this when you play it. The other thing that they've included on here are these great effects section. And I think anybody that uses a TB-03 will usually want some distortion and delay on it. So this makes it really bark. And if we then throw some delay into this as well, and of course we've got 2 waveforms as well, so this is exactly the way that TB-03 is. You've got a saw and a square. The other thing I like as well, we don't just have one type of overdrive and delay. Very easy to actually get the settings in here. You just hold down your function button. There's a number of things we can adjust in here. There's your MIDI channel, sync settings. What we want to do here is jump down to overdrive, and there's 3 different types we can get. So and you get quite a different quality from each one of them. And the same if we want to check out the delay as well. So You can move down to delay top. You can also choose to sync or not sync as well. I'll just turn that off so you can hear it. So we've got digital, tape delay, analog style, and finally you've got reverb on there as well, which is actually really nice. It gives quite an ambient sort of reverb. And when you sort of dial a bit of these in, so it's absolutely wonderful. It's just great fun to actually play on. A couple of other things. So with your pattern mode, you can actually temporarily move the number of steps in a pattern. So you can see there as I hold that down. And when you let go, it'll go back to its thing. So it's great if you're working with this live on stage, or even in the studio, indeed, if you wanted to record something like that. Okay, so now let's get into how we actually sequence, because that's what we're really here for, not just to sort of play with preset patterns. This is a sort of synth you really want to get into and create your own patterns. You've got the great octave changes in there, the accent and the slide, which really give it its own unique character. So to do that, what I'm going to firstly do is I'm going to switch my mode here over to pattern right. And just to escape all the preset patterns, I'm going to move right over to the last bank. So I've got a pattern in there, but what I'm actually going to do is clear that. Really easy to do that. You just hold down the button here. So for the number of the pattern you want to clear, hit pattern clear, and now we have a completely blank pattern. So we're going to make sure we're in the original TB-03 programming mode. So we're going to hold down function, jump over to mode, and we're in the original. So we can choose original or step. I think what you will find is most people will probably just resort to using the step mode because it's a lot easier to do. But for purists and anyone that wants that sense of really programming a TB-03, it's in there if you want to use it. I'll show you briefly how it works. It's actually quite complicated. What we typically remember from using a step sequencer, you could go through your steps, say 1 to 16. Each step you'd select a note. You could choose whether it's in a different octave, has the tie or the slur or whatever, and then you'd move on to the next step and program that. The TB-03 did not work that way. It actually relies on you doing passes to be able to do this. So the first thing you would do is you'd set a step count. So we're going to hold down function and we're going to press step. And this lets me choose how many steps I want to use. So I'm going to go right through, I'm going to choose 16, which is equivalent of 1 bar. The next thing we want to do is move into pitch mode. So we're going to make a pass putting in all the pitches. Again, it's pretty easy. You just press the note you want. It automatically moves on to the next step. That's pretty much that done. And then what we can do, just check that. We jump back to pitch modes and then we will just press through. And if we want to change any of those notes, we can. The next thing I've got to do is add a pass with all the rhythms. So we jump into time mode, and once again we have the value on the display there that shows us what step we're on. And we're going to use these 3 buttons to do this. So I can either choose to have a note, I can choose to have a tie, or I can choose to have a rest on each step. So to do that, let's say we're going to have a note here. We're going to have another note, we might have a tie on this step, and we might have a rest, and we can just keep going through doing this until we hit 16. And that's that. And then if we jump back now into time mode, we can just check through these, and you'll see the light here tells me what I've selected. And now we've done that, we can play the pattern back. And then of course I could so you've got a basic pattern there. You can also add accents and slides in there if you want to. The next mode we're going to look at is the step mode, and that's a lot more similar to what we expect from plugins. It's the same system they used in Rebirth. It's the same system they use in all the TB-03 emulation plugins, and even in some of the hardware emulations as well that are out there. What we need to do to get into that mode, hit function again, change over to mode. Now I'm going to change into step mode. This will be a lot more familiar to people who have programmed anything with a step sequencer before. Let's jump over to a new pattern, and we're going to now go into our pitch mode. So this is where we actually do everything though in this particular mode. So I choose a note, and you'll see the step moves on to the next one, but I actually do have the option of moving back if I wanted to add things. So let's just put the notes in first. All right, now we can play that back. So that's my pattern in there. Let's have a look now at what we can do with each of the notes. So you'll notice again when I turn the knob, what the note will sound that's on that step. But we can really easily create our accents and slides. So let's move over to maybe this one here, and we'll put a slide on that. Okay, let's put an accent on that one, and we might put that one up the octave, maybe that one down the octave, and let's put a slide on that. Another accent there. Let's go down the octave for that one. All right, let's see what we've got. Now once we've got the pattern fully programmed, we can hit playback, and then once again spend our time actually making the sound. What I'll just mention quickly before we move on to tracks, if we just jump back to our normal mode here, there are actually 3 different patterns that you can use inside each pattern itself. So you've got part A, you've got part B, and you've got part C. So each pattern can actually be broken down into 3 sub patterns if you want to program more. Track mode I'm not going to go into a lot in terms of how you program it. I'll just tell you what it does. So we have 7 tracks. So this is where you can see the numbers in dark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And similar to what is on the TR-09 as well, you can sequence a group of patterns and create a track that plays back. So just to play you one that's in here already, move to playback mode for track. Let's jump over to number 1 and just see what's in there. And what you'll see happens is we move through the bars here as it plays. And you can just choose what you want to put in each bar. It's quite good actually. There's a couple of things you can do. You can set a da capo bar, so when it hits to that point it'll jump back to the beginning. You can also set a dal segno bar as well, so you can jump back to that point when you hit the button. And once again, it'll be probably most useful when you're performing live with it. You can use it in the studio, but you'd probably do it in some other ways doing that. Probably the final thing to mention on this is it comes with a great built-in stand as well, so you're not actually limited to having it stuck to the desk like this. If you want to perform with it, or you want to put it somewhere else in the studio where you can see it properly, you've got a 2-stage riser, and if we keep pulling it up, we'll get a second one. So you can position it in a couple of different ways. You don't need to use, obviously, the keyboard that was released for the other boutique instruments because it has an internal sequencer and you actually don't need the keyboard at all. The final thing we look at is how you can integrate the TB-03 with your computer-based setup. Everyone's going to be using this in a studio pretty much, so what we want to be able to do is to easily get it into your software, either with MIDI or to record. If we have a look at what I've got set up here in Logic, I've created an external instrument here. So all we need to do is select the MIDI destination, which will go to the TB-03. We'll go to channel and it'll come back in on input 1 and 2. So once we've got that there, the other thing we can do is also create a track to record it. So I've just got this running into a bus and then coming back into an audio track, and we'll actually arm both of these and then you can see what it will record. So you can see we've actually recorded, not only have we got the audio dead easy, it's also recorded this MIDI part in, which is great as well because we get the controller data automatically put in there. So very easy to use in your software setup. Built-in 2496 audio interface will run straight into your software, dead easy. Thanks for watching. We've been looking at the TB-03 from Roland today. If you'd like more information, you can come and see us in store or find us on Facebook or online at kosmic.com.au.
No matter what you play or want to learn, Australia's leading musical instrument retailer Kosmic Sound offers a range of guitar, bass, DJ, high-tech, drum and PA equipment to suit your needs. Check us out online at kosmic.com.au.